So this webinar is being recorded. This webinar is being recorded today, and I will be sending out a copy to everyone who registered to this event. A quick note from our lawyers, please be aware that the information provided in this webinar will be general in nature only and does not constitute personal financial advice. Before acting on any information from this presentation, you should consider how appropriate this information is in regard to your objectives, financial situation and needs. And finally, please note that this is a safe space, so you can ask any questions throughout the event by typing in the chat. I'll ask our speakers some questions and then we'll keep some time at the end for Q&As if they come through. So very quick intro on Cleanaway. So Cleanaway Waste Management is Australia's leading total waste management, industrial and environmental services company. They've served Australia for over 50 years, delivering solutions that offer extraordinary benefits, not just to customers, but for the communities and environments that we live in. They employ over 6,300 expert staff and own a specialist fleet of over 5,300 vehicles spread across 250 locations in Australia. Cleanaway collects, processes, treats, recycles and safely disposes of all types of waste. As of 2022, they've recovered over 29 kilotons of plastic. Because they see waste as a resource, managing Australia's waste needs isn't a matter of asking where does it go now, but what it can be next. They've also recently partnered with the Pact Group and Asahi Beverages to create Circular Plastics Australia, which is a joint venture to close the loop on PET plastic. This partnership creates valuable raw materials sourced from container return schemes across the country to be turned into new beverage and food containers. So that's a bit of an intro on Cleanaway, and I'll very quickly introduce our brilliant speaker today, which is Richie. And Richie is responsible for all aspects of the investor relations strategy at Cleanaway. He is responsible for monitoring and researching how the market views and values Cleanaway, as well as the community engagement, sustainability reporting, and so much more. He's worked with some of Australia's top ASX 100 listed companies and brings a wealth of experience to his role at Cleanaway. So thank you again, Richie, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank
you. So could you maybe tell me a little bit about yourself, your journey in the world of investor relations and sort of how you came to get this role at Cleanaway?
Yeah, no worries. So you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not Australian. So I moved to Australia about 21 years ago and started working for Origin Energy originally in sort of business analyst type roles. Worked in their carbon markets and carbon as a carbon analyst and a carbon trader over a number of years, and then took over the strategic planning for their energy risk management team. At that point in time, Origin was going through a bit of transition. There was another large company, British Gas, trying to take over Origin at the time, and they needed additional support in their investor relations function. And because I had a broad range of experience across the business, I knew lots of different aspects of the business, they asked me to help out in that role. I think that's kind of a similar journey that most people in investor relations have. I don't think too many go in saying, I want to be in investor relations. Maybe there are, I haven't met too many, but we all seem to have fallen into the roles. Yes. And everyone that falls into it seems to stay there because it's a really interesting role. You get to talk to all people across all parts of your business and, hopefully get a deep knowledge of the broader business, whatever business that is that you're in. So after I was at Origin for a few years doing that role, I moved it to Infigen Energy, took over the head of investor relations in that role and broadened out that role to cover off strategy, government affairs, so dealing with all various stakeholders, which is important. Back at that time was around 2010, and that's when former Prime Minister Abbott was coming into power. So Gillard to Abbott, Gillard Rudd Abbott, and there's a bit of so government relations was an important aspect in relation to the renewable energy target at that time, just trying to fight for our survival at Infigen back in the day. And then I took a couple of years off to look after my young kids and then joined Cleanaway about 2.5 years ago. Really attracted to the company just due to it was very similar in terms of the sustainability elements to it, circular economy, the mission of the business was making a sustainable future possible. So all of those elements, the complexity of the waste industry was also pretty attractive to me. I come from a background I'm an engineer by initial training and done business qualifications since then, but I like the complexity of businesses and being able to try and take that complexity and explain to investors and analysts how you can actually create value out of that.
Wow. So yeah, going back to government relations, I was thinking that would have been quite challenging for you when we did have all those sort of leadership changes at one point. So you would have been saying, who do I talk to? But that's awesome. That's a great way, and yeah, not something you can study for, definitely something you kind of have to fall into. Can you give us a bit of an overview of Cleanaway's mission and its role in the world, give us an overview of Cleanaway's mission and its role in the world's decarbonisation journey?
Yeah, for sure. So our mission is to make a sustainable future possible together. So we've a new leadership team came in place about 12 to 18 months ago. So prior to that, the prior leadership team put together a strategy that we called Footprint 2025. And that strategy was about assembling what we call a group of privileged assets. So assets that had EPA licenses attached to them, and that creates a strategic moat for the business. So basically makes it very difficult for people to replicate the business that we had by assembling those assets and providing those services to the customers. With the new leadership team, that strategy has been evolved into a strategy that we now call Blueprint 2030. It's called Blueprint for a reason. So blue represents Cleanaway, the Brooklyn blue color that we have. Blue represents sustainability, and blue represents the blue sky ambition we have in terms of the strategy. So it's quite detailed strategy and quite broad. And print is really just an acknowledgement of the legacy left behind by the prior management team through Footprint 2025. So Blueprint 2030 is it's a customer-led evolution of the Footprint 2025 strategy, where we're extending and integrating those assets that we've assembled to deliver low carbon and high circularity solutions for customers. So what we've seen over the last number of years is not only has the policy changed in terms of there's been landfill levies coming in, waste bans, changes to international legislation, but also demand from our customers. And we acknowledge not all customers are the same. We've got a continuum of customers, from those who just want us to pick up their waste and deal with it and for it to be not in trouble, to what we call sort of sustainability pioneers, so the likes of Coles and Woolworths and City of Sydney, those types of enterprises where they've already done sort of a lot of the stuff on changing out light bulbs and reducing their emissions through various other aspects, but now want to really tackle eliminating waste from landfill, so waste diversion and the circular economy. And really circularity and carbon reduction are very much interlinked. Anything that's highly circular, there's a very good chance, it's not always the case, but there's a very good chance that's a lower carbon solution, because when it comes to plastics and that, you're not drilling for new fossil fuel to create virgin plastic. You can take the existing plastic, turn that into new pellets, create new bottles, to the point of the Circular Plastics Australia joint venture. That is a bottle to bottle solution where we collect about 1 billion bottles a year from New South Wales. And if you buy a bottle of Coke or Coleridge water in Aubrey Wodonga, there's a very, very, very high chance that's come from a 100% recycled PET plastic pellet. So we look to do that across all the various waste chain or waste streams in our business that we collect. And as I said, the policy is really driving improvements in decarbonisation as those policies are implemented. So a good example is the recent transaction we did with GRL. So we acquired an organics processing business in Sydney. That was a business that we were already supplying the waste stream into as part of the Suez assets that we acquired last year. So what that does is it takes, in Sydney we call it the red bin, so the residual bin, basically where you put everything that's not in your sort of mixed recycling bin. And it takes that and it tries to separate the organic component out of that from the other stuff that people just end up leaving in that bin. And it effectively inerts that waste. So by inerting the waste, you reduce the amount of carbon coming from that, as opposed to sending it to landfill, where it would turn into methane, and that's far more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2, as I'm sure all your investors know. So with that facility, and with the policies in place in New South Wales, every council in New South Wales will have to offer Fogos, so that's food organics, garden organics bins to their residents by 2030. And a large proportion of C&I customers will have to offer it or have that in place by 2025. So we see that facility as being really a transition, or a facility that we can transition into that market as it evolves. And in doing so, you can effectively remove half of the waste that ends up in your red bin, is avoided from landfill, is treated, can be turned into a usable compost. And like our vision is really to be able, with the large categories that we deal with, is to be able to get that compost and eventually give it back to the councils and go, here, you can use that for soil enrichment, grow trees faster in your local parks and things like that. And ultimately you get that beneficial of actually it's carbon enhancing in terms of the soils, plus carbon avoidance from going into landfills.
Absolutely. I did read the press release, or I remember reading about the composting area that you guys just purchased, and I thought it sounded so cool, and you guys are putting in a lot of money to really develop it and kind of make it state of the art. So I'm a bit of a compost geek, so I'm excited.
I know, absolutely. So it's on a massive scale, so like 40 to 50 million just to bring the compost effectively shed inside, or bring the compost inside by building a, we call it a shed, but it's a very advanced shed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's often we forget like some of the simplest solutions, which is composting, can have such an incredible impact if we do it at scale and if we do it well. So I'm excited for you guys. On to the next. So Cleanaway says that they see every bit of waste as an opportunity to create something new. I know you sort of explained it here a bit in your previous question, but can you expand on how exactly does Cleanaway achieve this? What are the programs in place? You talked about some bottle recycling, you've talked about some composting, but how else do you guys kind of reuse the waste that you collect?
Yeah, so I mean, that ties back into the strategy when I talked about high circularity, low carbon solutions. So the circularity element of that is we're privileged in that we get access to everybody's waste. People call it waste, we call it a resource, and then we get to choose what happens to that. Yeah. Landfill levies across Australia are rising, and because of those rising levies, there's an economic incentive not to send stuff to landfill. So then it gives us the decision, well, what would we do with that if we don't send it to landfill? What can we invest in? What infrastructure can we invest in? What partnerships can we develop to take that resource and turn that into something that's far more useful and do it in an economic way? Because we have investors like yourselves who want to get an economic return for what we do. So it's not we're not running a charity here by any means, but we are taking leadership positions in a lot of these types of things. So anything from if you think about it, historically in Australia, waste was collected, ended up straight in the tip, and basically as the landfill levies increase, what you're seeing is more difficult to recycle materials are being collected and infrastructure is being developed to recycle those. So very early in the piece, you had your metals, your aluminiums, your paper, your cardboards, your plastics, your different plastic polymers. Now you're going to start to see more and more complex types of waste, like textiles from sort of the fast fashion industry, soft plastics. We do oil recycling so when you go and if you've got an internal combustion engine car, which most of us probably still do at this stage, and you go and get your car serviced, the oil that's removed from that, we go and collect that from service stations. That's probably one of the most circular things that we do, in that when that is collected, that is re-refined into new base oil, and the only end product or waste product out of that is water and the sort of fines that has come out of the engine from providing the lubrication. So that gets fully recycled into it. It's actually a higher quality product. Recycled oil is a higher product quality than the virgin lube oil, due to the contaminants that are in it when you initially take it out of the ground and refine it. Wow,
it's funny, I hear these things. Same with like purifying water. Like often if you purify water, it ends up being cleaner than the water you started with. So same sort of logic. Very
similar to that, yeah. So and then we also know, we're not experts in everything. We know where our limitations are. So things like cardboards, for example, Visy are probably more of a leader in that. So we're an enabler of the circular economy when it comes to things like that. So we will collect, process, sort out those pieces of paper, those bits of paper and cardboard into different grades, provide that to a pulping facility that Visy or somebody else may have, and that enables that sort of circularity to complete. Where we did the joint venture with Pact and Asahi and Coca-Cola, we saw an opportunity in the market because China imported or imposed bans which prevented waste from, or sorted plastics from being sent over to China to be processed, and that was really a case that there was too high a level of contamination. So there was lots of not so credible operators, working in that market as well. And when they opened up bales, they were finding all sorts of stuff sort of stuck in the plastic bales. And you can still export plastic if it's refined to a certain level. But with that coming in place, with the national waste bans coming in place, we saw a position where there's going to be lots of available plastic in Australia, not much domestic processing capability. And then there was this huge pull from consumers who wanted to have higher recycled content in their containers, but there was no pellets available to do that because nobody was doing it. So we knew that our expertise kind of ended at the sort of simple manufacturing processes, and it was more Pact who's got the expertise in terms of creating those new polymers, or recycling those polymers. So it made sense for us to join, and Pact and Coke and Asahi also need that raw material at the end. So we get to input all of the raw material, and they get to take up the offtake through the facility, and we get to share in the economic benefits of the facility as a joint venture team. So we're looking continuously to, for all of those different types of things where we can play a role. So that was for PET plastic. We see the same thing with PP, which is the lids of your Coke bottle, and HDPE, which is your milk bottles. And there's a very interesting stat that I was shocked at when I heard when I joined Cleanaway. Something like only 13% of milk cartons are recovered and recycled. 1/3.
Oh,
which is
I wouldn't have imagined. Yeah, like why would the plastic in a milk carton be different to the one in a Coke? I would have assumed it would be the same.
Right, that they're different plastics, but it's not that it's that they're not. It's more a case that people are putting them into their general waste bin, and it's also due to the fact that those type of containers aren't collected through container deposit schemes, so there's less of an incentive for people to put them through there. But also the range of recycling offered to Australian consumers across the states differs. So there's some councils still don't offer recycling to their customers. So you don't have an option, you have to put it into your bin. But we've developed we've got a facility under construction in Laverton at the moment in Victoria that's going to pelletize basically the plastic milk bottles, that type of plastic, and the PP, which is the hard plastic caps that are on Coke bottles and the like.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, yeah, I'm shocked as well to hear that only 13%. That's super, super low. Cool. So going on, your latest sustainability report talks about Cleanaway is starting to prepare for climate risks. How do you believe climate risks will impact your business model and assets, and what are you doing to mitigate?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're obviously doing what we're doing in terms of we set carbon targets went out this year. So in 19th of August at our full year results, we put out our carbon targets, both 2030 and 2050 targets, separate targets for methane and for CO2, recognizing that the majority of our emissions are coming from methane through the landfill, and about 20% comes from our fleet and electricity usage on our sites. And so that's tackling the actual target. We've got plans in place to reduce those emissions, better landfill gas capture and things like that, electrifying our fleet, longer term looking at green hydrogen solutions for the heavy fleet, because unfortunately batteries at this stage, while they're good for light vehicles, we've done a number of trials with them, and we've got pretty heavy trucks by the end of the day, and they struggle to get up the hill when they've been out on the road for a bit, or if they do, it goes pretty slowly, and the trucks have to go into a recharge in the middle of the day, which isn't ideal from an operating efficiency perspective. More broadly, we've done, as part of the TCFD, analysis of the risks that we're exposed to. I mean, we don't have a huge amount of risk outside of risks to landfills to our assets. We had, obviously, with the flooding this year, a fairly significant impact to one of our landfills in Queensland, which your investors may be aware of, but that landfill had to close and is currently closed. So what happened there was we've got a large landfill that had its final cell at the bottom of a hill being developed. Queensland had, I think it was 720 mils of rain over a 48-hour period. So you can imagine that landfill cell effectively turned into, if you can picture the MCG full of water.
Oh God,
I know. Because it came in contact with the waste, it became anoxic. An odor came off it, and we had to deal with that. But the bigger issue was, because of the rainfall across the broader Queensland area, the water table had risen by 4 or 5 meters. So we were pumping water out on a daily basis, about 3 million liters of water a day. And for the 3 million that we were pumping out, we were getting a net extraction of about 0.6 million. So there's 2.4 just coming back in from the groundwater. So it's been a major engineering exercise, and we've obviously learned a lot from that. So we're back into the cellar from, I think, about 2 weeks ago. We've actually got to dry ground again, and we'll line that cell in preparation for the upcoming wet season. Use that as sort of a holding pond until we do the more detailed engineering, and then back to using that as a normal cell again. So it's really about, it's understanding some of those issues. We lost 43 trucks as well during those floods, so we We parked our trucks in outside Lismore Airport, which is the highest point in the area, never been flooded. Went out there was like planes floating down the runway. All the trucks, our trucks, DHL, everybody was parked there, and they all just flooded out. So obviously there are significant concerns. So we obviously have to plan around, next time, we've got another predicted La Nina event coming up this year. So it's really about, parking the trucks up the top of the mountain. So it's about adaptation for a lot of these types of things for us. And we'll do our part and more in relation to actually reducing emissions. But some of the things have been set in place from many years ago, and you just have to be able to adapt as a business and ensure that you can operate through them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's climate risks. It can impact, all businesses, even if you're actively reducing, even if you're totally zero emissions, it can still impact you. Awesome. Moving on. So you've had great revenue returns this year with a profit of 80.6 million. What about Cleanaway do you think contributed to this great financial result?
Yeah, there's a number of issues. I mean, we were probably a bit disappointed in our results from what it might have been. We had a lot of challenges this year, but a strong result notwithstanding. So the 80 million that you referred to is the statutory results. We like to look at our underlying numbers as well, because we've had a number of things that adjusted or one-off in nature, like the floods that resulted in very high expenses just to rectify those. But in terms of the highlights, we undertook that acquisition of the Sydney CWY assets during the year, which contributed to the results. So that's 2 landfills and 5 transfer stations, 1 inert landfill and 1 putrescible landfill in Sydney. That really sort of filled out the network in our business in Sydney, and allows us now to be able to better resource recover a lot of the materials that we collect through that network. Commodity prices increased significantly during the year. So when we refer to commodity prices, we're talking about the things that we recover. So cardboard, plastics, aluminiums, those types of things. So cardboard in particular increased, but that was largely, a lot of it was due to supply chain constraints. So when we had that ship that blocked the Suez Canal, we all remember that a while back, that caused a whole lot of constraints in the shipping world, and that got translated basically into the underlying price of OCC, or old corrugated cardboard, and we've got a bit of a benefit from that. We've had continuous success in winning municipal contracts, so the contracts that we do on behalf of the local councils, and that added to revenue as well, and then increased volumes into our post-collections assets. Was a significant contributor on the revenue line. Also, our health services business, so we provide through our Cleanaway Daniels health waste or clinical waste management services for most of the hospitals and vets and tattoo parlors, you name it, anyone that uses sort of syringes or any types of clinical waste. And obviously with COVID, there's been a huge amount of waste generated in the sector. Unfortunately for us, that while it led to a huge amount of revenue, it also led to an awful lot of inefficiencies in the business because of the volume of it. So if you understand how our business works, that business basically gets containers, drops them off at a hospital, has them in a lined bin, goes around, collects them, takes it away, disposes of them. And we charge generally on a weight basis. And when COVID occurred, you can imagine all of the materials that went into those bins was light, fluffy gowns, face masks, and that was all kind of stuffed in. So the buildings were quite full. We'd have to go and collect them, but you kind of pick them up with 2 fingers. So you're kind of shipping air around Sydney and Melbourne and all those areas that were heavily affected by COVID. So that was the inefficiency that came with that business, but did lead to higher revenue. But they were kind of the key things that impacted the business throughout the year.
Yeah, brilliant. Awesome. With the current market being quite volatile, do you think now is a good time to invest in recycling and the circular economy?
I'll give my legal team's advice. I'm not here providing financial advice, so all those disclaimers that go along with that. I think more broadly, I see sort of circularity as probably the next. It's the next decarbonization big theme in my view. I think everybody's kind of on board in terms of what we need to do to decarbonize the globe and the planet. We're all aware of it. Whether we're all taking action or not is a different question. But I think the next one down the line is going to be around circularity, and it's to my point that high circularity is in effect delivering you lower carbon solutions. So I think there are really good opportunities to invest in companies that are doing that. You know, again, get your own financial advice, but there's lots of big themes out there in terms of that decarbonization or that circularity, to my point around Fogo and things like that. You need to look at what are the big chunky things that are going to move from previously ended up in a landfill to now ending up in a reused or upscaled or upcycled type environments. There's going to be niche type stuff that you can probably look at as well, but in my view, you get better bang for your buck if you're looking at volume and scale. And then there's obviously going to be a need to look at some of the smaller and more difficult to recycle type elements, and we've got that within our blueprint strategy. We've got blueprints for all of the different types of waste streams. We've got an innovation stream that looks at those sort of upcoming things that are a bit more difficult to recycle, but the focus really has to be on let's do the big volume stuff first, and then keep tinkering along with the sort of the smaller stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I totally agree. I think, I think circular economy, renewable energy, I think it's going to be a really high growth. Well, obviously, we think it's going to be a high growth sector, but of course, everybody who's on the event, please do your own financial research, get your own financial advice. What do you think is the biggest challenge, Richie, that Cleanaway is facing in terms of recycling and moving towards a fully circular business model? I know you sort of touched on some of the challenges you guys experienced, with COVID, but I guess I'd be interested to know from a higher level, moving in the next 20 years, what are those challenges looking like?
Yeah, this is more industry comment than a Cleanaway comment, because we all have the same issue, and it's probably more a personal comment as well, because it's really all about source separation. So what we can see, so if we look at the container deposit scheme in New South Wales, for example, where hopefully we all or our kids or whoever diligently separate out our different bottles and put them into the reverse vending machines. When we come along to collect that material, it's nicely sorted into very clean streams of waste. The challenge we have is when you come to a household level, you get in Sydney, it's a yellow bin, probably different colored bins in different states, but your mixed recycling bin. The random stuff that ends up in that bin makes it very difficult for us to maximize the amount of resources we recover. So to give you a bit of a stat, we do, I think, 60% of the curbside recycling down in Victoria. Of the waste that goes in, that we collect, about 30 to 35% of that is contamination, and that ends up in landfill. So 1 in 3 things that people put into their yellow bins is stuff that shouldn't be in their yellow bin or cannot be recycled at the moment. So it's really about, and we do some of this education, but educating ourselves. I think it's almost like climate change to me and decarbonisation. I think my kids are more engaged in it than probably the generation above, older than me. And similarly, I think when it comes to recycling, I think kids are, when their minds are a bit more malleable, they take in this information and they can recall what's recyclable and what's not recyclable. It's never easy because there's so many sort of mixed messages out there as well. And one good tip I'll give to all the people on the call today is, when it comes to plastic recycling, a good rule of thumb is, if you can crush it in your hands quite easily, put it into your waste bin, because it's a good chance it's not recycled. Or take it to a specialized area. So your Coles or Woolworths will usually have specialized drop-off points for that. So keep it in a separate bag. If it's a hard plastic, it'll get recycled through the sort of curbside recycling.
Oh, Richie, I'm so guilty of. I actually had the exact opposite in my mind, and I thought I knew a little bit. I thought it was the soft plastics can definitely, and the hard plastics are what you should. That's the other tip.
So that, just to be very clear, the hard plastics we can recycle. The soft plastics are more difficult to recycle.
There you go. All right. What are the 3 most common things you guys see in recycling bins that should absolutely not be there?
Batteries. So lithium-ion batteries are a big problem for the industry. So when you see stuff in the newspapers or on the news about Cleanaway having a fire, it's the fire is generally caused by somebody putting a lithium-ion battery into their either red bin or yellow bin. Yellow bins are almost worse, but basically lithium is one of the most volatile elements on the periodic table, and if you break a lithium-ion battery, and then you think about what happens to the waste when it comes in, it's not treated very, it's in a bin, gets chucked into a big truck, gets compressed, ends up at one of our transfer stations where there's big, yellow gears, we call it, the big Tonka trucks moving waste around. One of those drives over that battery, Once it gets in contact with air, there's an explosion. Once it gets in contact with water, there's a fire.
Ooh.
So you can imagine if it's in a red bin, there's going to be all sorts of liquids in there that will cause that to go on fire. And that will take off like that. And if you're in a plastic recycling factory and you've got a lithium ion battery put into your mixed recycling, plastic is effectively fuel, and that will just take off. And that happens, that happens very, very regularly in the industry.
Oh gosh.
So please, there's places to recycle your batteries, local council specialized pickups and things like that. That's one of them. Flares used to be a big thing. So flares have a shelf life, and we often found in certain councils that were by the sea, where people had sort of boats and whatnot, wouldn't know where to put their out-of-date flares, and just chuck them in the bin. Not a great outcome. And gas bottles don't go into the mixed recycling either. Better places for those to be recycled.
It sounds like all explosives. So it's just people are placing explosives accidentally in their bins, and then they're just getting to clean away.
We also this year in our medical waste business, we had, because hand sanitizer has a shelf life of about 2 years, and we're a bit over 2 years into COVID. We've had some of our medical waste customers put bulk hand sanitizer into their medical waste, and the way medical waste was treated in the past was through a thing that we call the hammer mill, but smashes up basically different types of waste to make it unrecognizable. When you think about that, that's mechanical processing, hammers, effectively little hammers hitting things, causing sparks. Hand sanitizer is about 70% ethanol, so stuff that goes into blended with petrol. So on 2 occasions this year, one of our customers, or 2 different customers, put bulk hand sanitizer into that facility, and there've been 2 explosions. One that took out all of the extraction gear. The second caused a major fire. So now we've stopped doing that type of processing of that waste, and we've gone to a different solution called autoclaves, where we just kind of heat up the waste and destroy all the pathogens. Use some common sense and think about who's going to be picking up that waste next and treating it, and what they may be doing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have got some questions coming through, and guys, I will absolutely get to these, but just while we're on this topic, something's come through by batteries. Esther has asked, can batteries be caught by magnets?
Can batteries be caught by magnets?
I guess that's
pretty
an
sure
idea.
they do, but they wouldn't go through our, we wouldn't normally have them come through our facility, because we separate it into the things that we can reprocess it. So could be caught by a battery, but then it'll be flicked away.
Yeah, okay.
So
and she's also asked, she's also asked about aerosols. I won't turn this into a recycling Q&A, but I will just that one. What about aerosols? Can we throw our aerosols away, Richie?
That is different by state, I'm afraid. So this is why it gets a bit nebulous. So yeah, different councils and different recyclers will say yes or no.
Okay, all right. So just
look up to your local council. Most councils will have on their local websites what they will accept and what they will not accept.
Okay, there you go. All right, I've got the Q&As up, so I might start to answer those, and then we can always go back to my questions, but I just want to make sure we answer the questions that these people have sent through. So we've got one from Rick, and he has asked, in a circular economy, waste is a resource, and waste companies are urban miners equivalent to our big miners like Rio Tinto and BHP. Do you have the ambition to overtake our traditional miners, or do you see them moving into your space?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we talk about 2 things we talk about, and we kind of sometimes say it externally a bit, but we want to be recognized as the most sustainable waste management company in the world, we say. And then the other thing is we want to, at a point in time, probably call ourselves Cleanaway Resource Management rather than Cleanaway Waste Management, because that's how we think about what we do. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think as we become more circular, we will become, those businesses that actually have the resources, obviously not to the scale of companies like BHP and Rio who will export that stuff externally. The stuff we do will be domestically, and it'll be circular within the Australian economy. And that, I mean, to a degree, that's some of the issue is we import a lot of plastics. So we actually import more plastics than we consume as a nation. So while we do it, you end up just having them. This is one of the interesting things around the waste bans, is that it doesn't ban plastics coming into the country, it bans us sending plastics back out. So if we're importing a whole bunch of, Coca-Cola bottles, bad example, but whatever the plastic is, then we have to take it and reprocess it and turn it into pellets. and then you have this excess stock of these pellets. But you can export those pellets, I guess, to external markets for reprocessing. But it's an interesting twist on the whole ban that it's not actually, you're processing more than you consume.
Yeah, interesting. All right, we've got another question from Estelle. She says, thank you, Richie, very interesting. What are your opinions on waste to energy and household food waste diversion?
Yeah, so the household food waste diversion is the FOGO that I referred to. So across all of the states and territories, if you go to our presentation from the 7th of June, we've done a strategy presentation where we kind of outlined where the various states are up to in terms of their policies and future policies. But all of them are kind of moving towards this food organics and garden organics. So separating out, in Sydney, it's the green bin. I keep saying Sydney because I'm based in Sydney, but the green bin, your garden organics, that bin will eventually get bigger and bigger, and it'll become a FOGO bin, a food organics and a garden organics, where you can put all of your food waste into that, and then what's left is the residual waste. So stuff that's just really hard to recycle. The example we always give is use nappies, very hard to recycle that. So, and to tie into the energy from waste question, the last remaining beneficial use of that is the energy content that's embedded with it. So you've got a choice with that, because you can either send it to a landfill, or you can capture the embodied energy in it, displace energy from the grid, and you capture that, and then you're reducing the volume of that waste as well, and take that to landfill.
Absolutely. It's such an interesting concept, waste to energy. I've only sort of recently learned about it and how it sort of works, and yeah, it's really fascinating.
Just on that, on that point as well, there's often conflicting views about whether that's circular or not circular, and different nations and different regions have taken different approaches to it. So you'll see in Europe, people probably say it's a bad thing because people are digging up landfills now to feed the energy from waste facilities that they've developed, and that's really a case of they've jumped straight from landfill to energy from waste and have not done the recycling in between.
Yeah.
And now when you do more of that recycling, there's less and less feedstock to go into your energy from waste facilities. So they're trying to find sort of fuel sources for that. What's happening in all states and territories in Australia is there's like a mandated FOGO step before you get to energy from waste. So all of the stuff that can be readily recycled, turned into compost, all of those resources are already taken out of the bin, and what's really left is really that stuff that's you can't recycle. So it's important to have that distinction when people kind of talk about across different jurisdictions.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Awesome. We have another question from Rick, and he says, if you see waste as a resource, then supporting source separation is a shared responsibility. How should source separation systems be changed to enhance circularity? I guess you've sort of touched on this, but we'll give a more specific answer.
Yeah, no, for sure. Part of it is, a lot of it's education. I keep referring to red bins, green bins, and yellow bins here. The reason I do that is obviously I'm based in Sydney, but you'll find if you're investors across different states, we all have different colored bins, and even within Sydney, different councils will have different colored bins. And if you kind of move from suburb to suburb or state to state, there can often be confusion about what goes into the different bins. So there's quite often a lot of time where people want to do the right thing but don't know. So it's about educating yourself, improving things like container deposit schemes and expanding those. So there's always been a lobby to go, why can't we put our wine bottles into container deposit scheme? If I can put my my glass beer bottle out, but I can't put my wine bottle. And that's due to when the scheme was first established. It was established as a litter reduction scheme, so it was sort of single-use containers that we're trying to remove from streets and parks and things like that. But there is a significant push to expand that. And as I said, the more of this sort of stuff that you can source separate into cleaner materials, the less contamination there ends up being when we try to go to reprocess it. It's a good example is like, if you think about, say you've got a street full of mixed recycling in your local suburb, and somebody decides to put an empty or half empty can of paint in top of their recycling. Not only does it contaminate that person's waste, by the time it ends up in the truck, if that paint can opens, it's destroyed all of the recycling for the neighborhood. So it's that education piece of going, let's think more carefully about what we put into our different bins to ensure the best outcome, and let's not get lazy about it, because resources are finite. We are rapidly depleting them as a civilization, and we just need to get better at this stuff.
Absolutely. So no batteries, no explosives. We've learned that today at least. So we'll have to go out there and keep educating ourselves. We've got a question from Marion. She says, where can we find that presentation on Fogos regulations from June that you just mentioned now? Should we just go
on our corporate website? If you go to cleanaway.com.au, there's an investor tab there. And then if you go to the ASX releases, I think it's on the 4th page at this stage, given all the releases we've done over the year. It's called Strategic Deep Dive Blueprints 2030 or something like that, I think is the title.
I might get the link from you afterwards if that's okay, Richie. Yeah, and I always do a post-event email, guys. So I'll include the link to that Fogo in that post-event email as well. So hopefully that'll be really easy for everyone to access. I'm going to keep going with the Q&As, Richie, if that's okay, because it's coming in. We've got another one from Marion. What's the view of Cleanaway on home compostable packaging or commercially compostable packaging in Fogo?
Yes, if it's compostable, it's fine. You can put, basically put anything that's compostable into the Fogo bin.
Awesome. Esther says, is there a need for waste management standardization across the country, and how would that impact on the more rural and regional areas?
I mean, standardization in terms of bins would be useful, both from better source separation, but I think the education piece becomes easier when everybody is playing by the same rules, I guess is the broader point. It is difficult in regional and rural areas. So to my earlier point around scale is important when it comes to these types of things. When you move from a green organics bin to a Fogo bin, that changes how you have to process that waste. So if you think about your garden organics today, your clippings from your lawn and your trees and whatnot, basically that's all taken to a big fields, outside the city where land is relatively cheap. It's shredded up, put into big piles in an open windrow, and basically just turned over a period of a few weeks. The composting process just happens. And when you introduce food organics into that, you're thinking, use sandwiches, bits of chicken bones, fish, whatever you name it. You can imagine if you put that in an open windrow, the vermin problem and all of the various odor issues that come with that. So that's why that has to be brought indoors. So when I talked about the GRL facility, that's building that sort of $40 million shed. Basically, that's taking that indoor, it removes the odor issue, removes the vermin issue, and then allows you to process that in an area that's close to the area where the waste is produced. And that's one of the sort of EPA principles, is to try and deal with the waste as close to the source as possible, because waste is heavy. And you can imagine, the carbon impact of trying to ship all of our waste, a couple of 100 kilometers somewhere else to be treated. So it needs to kind of consider those elements. So back to the point about rural and regional Australia, we need to find solutions, and we do that more broadly with our network of assets. So as you said in our introductory, we've got more than 250 sites across the country. We try and use those to bulk up the waste so that we can bring them into a centralized processing plant. But there's going to be situations in very remote and rural areas where it just becomes challenging. People aren't willing to pay for it. The local council has its own landfill, and it just goes straight from waste collection to the tip. But as I said, if we can tackle the big issues, the little issues are become less significant.
Absolutely, that's it. We've got another question here from Granville Taylor. Says, glass can be a difficult containment in yellow bin recycling. Can a 4th bin for glass be justified?
Yeah, so the big issue with glass is it contaminates the cardboard. So glass breaks because of the cardboard, and then it makes the cardboard difficult or impossible to recycle. So it's on a council by council basis. Some already have it across different jurisdictions. But yeah, very, again, you need to sort of segregate what are the biggest challenges for for that area or that region. And I would probably argue that Fogo is probably more important than separating your what you lose through glass contamination into your mixed recycling is probably less of an issue than the beneficial use you get from capturing your Fogo. Both from unfortunately, we've got lots of resources to create new glass in Australia, and it's not that the beneficial there's not a huge amount of reuse of glass, and then sort of putting it into road base and things like that separating that as its own commodity doesn't have necessarily a huge benefit. It benefits from taking it away from the other resources and contaminating those.
Yeah, totally makes sense. All right, well, I'll get on to our last question. So Richie, are there any other clean tech or sustainability areas and sectors you will think will experience particular growth in the next couple of years? Do you have any hot tips that are not financial advice, of course?
Yeah, I guess it's more probably one that I hope to see, and it's back to the source separation point. So once it comes to us, say, into our material recovery facility, we've got people called pickers who stand on, it's kind of like reverse manufacturing. What we do, we take the already made up sort of mixed egg and kind of try and reproduce it into its egg again. Basically, you got pickers on the line to pick out the stuff that shouldn't be in the recycling. If you can get AI, artificial intelligence, to do that, to be as dexterous as the people and identify stuff like that, you massively improve the sort of, the amount of materials that are able to be recovered and reused by being able to eliminate those sort of materials. So a combination of us doing the right thing at the source, and then when it gets to the MRF, being able to actually then pull out that additional materials, you'll end up having better source separation, better identification of different plastic polymers. You're going to get your soft plastics out quite quickly, probably do better things with that.
Well, there's some clever people doing clever things out there. I never even thought about the idea of AI. Yeah, but picking it out, that would be such an efficient tool for you guys, and I think for a lot of people. All right, I did say it was my last question, but we've just had one more come through, which I'm just making. This is from Rick, sorry, and he says, okay, I'm not going to do a good job of pronouncing this, so I hope you understand. What do you think of Veena Shahajawal's micro recycling factories? Is this something Cleanaway is pursuing? Do you know this? I'm going to send you the question in the comments.
I have a rudimentary knowledge of it, so I wouldn't be best placed to answer it.
Okay, there you go. So we can't, no worries. Easy peasy.
At a very high level, I'd go back to my point about, for somebody like Cleanaway, we do stuff at scale. And for us to make the biggest difference, it's kind of those bigger things that we should focus on. And there's definitely a role for that more innovative stuff. And then that'll eventually get to scale, but unfortunately, we can't be all things to all people at all times. So we've got an element of our strategy that focuses on innovation, but there's still a huge amount of opportunity in terms of actually getting some of those big resources out of our waste streams and recovering them, both from a carbon reduction perspective and from a resource recovery and reuse perspective.
Amazing, brilliant. All right, guys, well, that'll be it. Richie, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a valuable session. I myself have learned so much from a high level and from a basic don't recycle batteries level. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today. As I've said, I will be sending the session via email tomorrow. So if you didn't catch it all or you want to relook at anything, you'll be able to do that. Thank you once again, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you, Richie.
Thanks, Anna. Pleasure.
Take care. Bye.